It is time. It's time to stop hiding. It's time to stand up. It's time for Christians to come together, to share their testimony, to inspire hope, and to join their brothers and sisters as we answer the call. Folks, it's time to wake up the lions. And I have an absolute lion with me today who has been off on his own journey. And I'm so incredibly proud of what he's doing and I love it, love every minute of it, that I am really looking forward to sharing it with you today. Please welcome the pastor of Resilient Church and the author of You Need Friends, Pastor Jake Thurston. Jake, how you doing, brother?
It's just another day in paradise, Rory. I can't complain, man.
Man, this is a guy who's working his butt off right now, so I absolutely love it. Um, Jake, as we get into this, man, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule because I can only imagine what you're up against. Tell everybody a little bit about, who is Pastor Jake Thurston? What are you about? What are you working on now? The whole bit.
Yeah. Wow, wow, wow. Who is Jake Thurston in a nutshell? Um, so Jake Thurston is a pastor of a new church plant that's only 3 years old in Vermillion, South Dakota, which is supposedly known as the Miami of South Dakota. No one knows why. This is a fun fact for you. It's not that significant. But what is significant is that Vermillion is home to the University of South Dakota. So it's a college town, small town with a huge university. So we have a huge heart for ministering to college students and young adults. It's kind of the unique makeup of our church here, where we reach like our congregation during the semesters are probably 60 to 70% college students and young adults, which is very, very exceptional. So we love doing that. That's awesome. I otherwise don't have a lot of free time on my hands anymore because if I want to sleep in, I might have 3 hours to myself because I have three wonderful kids. I love them dearly. I really do. Amelia's 4.5, Adeline's 2.5, and Beckett is 1/2. He's 6 months.
Wow.
So that takes up a lot of time and energy, but we love them dearly. Married to my wife Kasey of over 6 years. Yeah, and we just like love living out here in Vermillion. I love Chipotle Mexican Grill. It's the best restaurant in the world. That's kind of my shtick. It's every pastor has that thing they always refer to in their sermons. For me, it's just the superiority of Chipotle over Qdoba. That's just my, and people give me a lot of flack for it, but but here's the key, Rory. If students are leaving, like we just had one of our students leave because she's moving on to the next thing. She wrote me a thank you card and included in it a $25 gift card to Chipotle.
Ah, ha,
So it
ha.
pays off in the end.
I see the method to the
Um,
madness.
yeah, although yes, that's it. It's just kind of a silent way of having people give me gift cards. But no, truly, like I've almost always, this is a other key piece about it. You've alluded to it, but like I've just been gifted with positivity for whatever reason. Like I just have always kind of been this happy-go-lucky guy because the joy of Christ fills me, and I almost take it upon me as my own personal mission to light up whatever room I'm in. Not in an obnoxious way, hopefully, some people might think it's a little overbearing, but at the very least, I just try to make people's days and shine the light of Christ on them in that way. And so, yeah, really passionate about that. I mean, that's a surface level view. I can go into all the other nerdy details of my life if you want to, but we'll maybe keep it there for now.
No, I love the positivity thing. And to be honest, it's one of the things that makes you such a great podcast guest, to be honest. So
Thank you.
I love having you on. And Jake, for those of you who don't know, Jake was gracious enough to be on one of my other podcasts. I'm blessed to have him here with us again today, talking about these topics, that we're going to dive into. Pastor of Resilient Church. Let everybody know the name. I love the name Resilient Church.
Yes. Yes. And I have to enunciate it, resilient church. Sometimes YouTube captions put it as Brazilian church, but it is resilient church. Specifically, when you're a church planter, you have to discern like what's the vision God's giving you, like what, and a part of that includes the name. Like the name of your church is powerful in communicating who you are and what you're about. And our mission was to cultivate resilient disciples in Jesus. This is especially prevalent for the next generation, where it's honestly harder to be a Christian the younger you are today because of the number of different circles that they're in. Very much living in a post-Christian culture with, secularism all over the place. So we wanted to really plant a church that preaches the gospel of Jesus in a way that says, yeah, life's hard, but it's worth it. And just because it's hard doesn't mean God's not there. In fact, he's right there by your side. You can have a vibrant life in Jesus, that isn't without hardship, but that withstands it. When you read throughout Scripture, there is not a single person, a single faithful person who doesn't have it hard in some way. Um,
Yeah.
Jesus himself being the pinnacle example, right?
Right.
Every one of them goes through something hard, and that's not counterintuitive to our faith. That's a part of it. So we just really wanted to cultivate that form of a disciple, um, yeah, in our community. So,
Beautiful. It's it fits, exactly to what you're trying to
mhm.
do. So I love that. You wrote a book, You Need Friends, and I know we had a
Yes.
good chance to talk about it on our the other podcast you're on with me. But this is a very, very different group of listeners on this particular
Mhm.
podcast here. So tell us, some of these folks for the first time. Uh, you Need Friends, written by you. What made you write the book? What's it about? So on.
Oh, I just got chills thinking about it. Like, have you ever stumbled upon a topic or a message or an idea that you just can't shake?
Yeah,
Um,
I
that's
have.
me with this idea. Like we all have that message that just resonates with the core of us so much so that we feel like we were placed on this earth specifically to get that message out.
Yeah.
That's for me with this message. Like I've always been a positive guy, but a large part of that's because I'm a very extroverted guy. I love people, I love friendships. Like I've always been that kind of a person. Even in youth group, I just had a radar for the person who was on the outs in some ways. So I try to loop them into the group, make sure everyone feels included. So when I was in my graduate degree, it was my first semester of grad school, and I stumbled upon a fact that just blew my mind. And it was that America was amongst the loneliest nations in the world. And I'm like, how is that even possible? We got it made here, right? We're one of the loneliest nations in the world, and that we are enduring a loneliness epidemic. Now, this was in 2015. This was 10 years ago. I feel like it's, common practice now for us to talk about the loneliness epidemic, but this has been happening for a long time,
Yeah.
where we are relationally malnourished as a society. Then in the same semester, I stumbled upon a topic called spiritual friendship, which is this ancient Christian practice that goes deep into church tradition about a form of friendship that just blows our minds in comparison to what our worldly approach to friendship is. And so I kind of had this crazy thought, like, how could the local church remedy our loneliness epidemic through the rediscovery of spiritual friendship for the modern era? And so I just, from there, I spent the rest of my graduate degree studying that, and I'm like, I couldn't get enough. So I launched a blog about it. I started giving keynote presentations on it, went on some podcasts on it, even went on to complete my doctorate of ministry last year. I've spent almost 10 years researching this topic, and it culminated with this book, You Need Friends: Reclaim Your God-Given Design for Community and Remedy Your Loneliness for Good. So it really just goes into the psychology of how we are at our best when we are amongst great friends, especially ones that are pursuing Christ-likeness together. There's just a caliber of friendship with similar people pursuing these deeper things that you just can't compare to anything else, right? So I talk about that. I also talk about like the social forces that's fueling our loneliness epidemic. There's a cultural contagion that's going on here. So we talk about that, as well as some other key practices of how to go deeper in our friendships to give us a relational satisfaction that our lonely society is so desperately hungry for. So that's the flyover view of the book. It's my passion project for sure. And the other fun thing, so like it is available, it's on Amazon right now, but I am in the midst of recording the audiobook right now too. So hopefully that will be available come September as well. So
Nice. Are you going to do the recording yourself?
I am, I
Nice.
am doing the recording
Nice.
myself. So
All
you
right.
get to hear my voice even more if you want that, I guess. So
That is going to be on fire. I absolutely love it. It's going to be great. All right. Well, awesome. Very cool. I love that it's informative, it's educational, but then you also have the actionable part, at the end
yeah.
for folks. So I think that's important, for people, because it isn't just, hey,
Hmm.
let me just tell you about this and here's my opinion. It's,
Yeah.
here's what I'm seeing, here's why, and here's what we might be able to do about it. Why don't you give this a try?
Yeah,
So that's a much more
for
effective
sure.
book when you can come across like that.
Yeah, and this isn't to toot my own horn or to brag, but like, I mean, I score the Amazon reviews that come in for it, and to read all those things, you can't help it as an author. But one of the things that constantly came up was people appreciating truly how practical and applicable it is. A lot
Yep.
of books on community and friendship just talk about how good it is, we all need them, but it doesn't give very clear next steps of how to get there. And that's something like, I mean, I'm a preacher. And I believe that the word of God should, one, never be boring. You should never snooze when you're engaging with the word of God. It should be captivating. But it should also be solving our problems, right? Like, yeah, it's something good to study and we should know it, but it should ultimately drive us to become better versions of ourselves. Every sermon I preach should have some form, it's tackling some issue you're facing that the gospel resolves. The gospel is entirely pragmatic and practical. It should be changing us. So definitely approach the book in the same way of how to, yeah, take all of these concepts and not just let it be head knowledge for you to know a little bit more, but to give you some next steps to increase your friendships in a meaningful way.
I love that. All right. I'm glad the Amazon reviews are backing that up. That's awesome. That's got to
That's
help
what they
you.
say. That's what they're reporting. So,
That has to help you. One of the things that we talk about on here on this particular podcast is how God has influenced your life. Now, granted, for you, He's constantly influencing your life. You've devoted your life
yeah.
to it. So, but maybe kind of share with folks, where did that calling come from? Where did that start?
Mhm.
When? How'd you experience it so that you knew I'm being called to go serve, to do this, and so on.
For sure. I've always grown up in the local church. My faith has always been a central part of like I had faith before I even knew what faith was as a kid growing up in the church. Like my mom served on staff with our local church. My dad was on the board. He counted the offering. Like we were there for all three services. I was there on Thursday afternoons and evenings for worship rehearsal. Like it was my life since I was in the womb, right? Um, so but it didn't really get personal for me until I had a deep problem that I had to resolve. And as many young men go through, like I had to endure pornography addiction in junior high, that filled me with so much shame. I was hiding it from my parents. My parents were my best friends. I told them everything. But I had to keep that on lockdown for a couple of years. And so Lord knows I wasn't talking to them about it.
Right.
So then I figured, well, I'm going to turn to the one person who I know will love me regardless. And all right, let's try to actually cultivate this faith in God thing. And so I finally started reading, those teen devotional books that my mom would always get me for Christmas. And I'm like, oh, this is cute. I'm not going to read it. Thank you though. So I was like, let's give this a shot. And I slowly but surely started learning about who God was. Like, I mean, he didn't absolve my addiction right away. Like, that was the reason why I was doing it. I had a problem I wanted to get solved, but he took me along the long way, because there was more to him I needed to learn, more about his story that I wanted to learn. Like I was engaging in scripture in deeper ways. I was seeing the full narrative of the Bible now come through. It wasn't just like a textbook to pick apart. It was a story that I was finding myself in and learning how I fit into that grand narrative of Israel, who constantly wandered away, and God who always gave them second chances and all of that. So I did that, and then eventually felt compelled to confess that sin when I had matured enough, and all that went really well and better than I ever could have imagined. And then a year, so that was when I was a freshman in high school. Then almost a year later, so that confession happened in January 2009, definitely a turning point for my faith. And then December of 2009, I was a sophomore now at that point. Me and my youth group went to a Wesleyan youth convention. We're part of the Wesleyan denomination. Went to this hotel in Louisville, Kentucky, and man, like just a bunch of amazing sessions where we really engaged with God in really cool ways. But one of those morning sessions was all about the vocational call to ministry, essentially laying your career down on the altar and saying you're going to serve the church. And the preacher at that time said that by the end of the message, if anybody was feeling that particular call to come up on the stage in front of your peers as that declaration of you accepting this. And I couldn't explain it. I just knew it's what I had to do. I had to do it. Um, and I haven't looked back since. So so I even began pursuing that calling as a sophomore in high school now, from running the, computer slides in the back of the room for youth group to now leading the youth group games and leading a small group of junior high boys. And like it started very small, but then had continued to develop its way through, going to Bible school and getting a ministry apprenticeship before, full on pastoring. But that's kind of what led me there. And really just that calling really just came out of just the daily obedience of faithfully following God through everything I did every day. That's what it was. There wasn't anything special about my life. I was just trying to do the best I could to follow him in the little things every day, that led to that invitation. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Nice. The as you have gone through your life, I mean, you wear your faith on your sleeve. It's nobody
Hmm.
would ever spend 5 minutes with you and not know, right? That you are in the Word
Hmm.
100%,
Yeah.
man. And I love that. But given that, and given the times and the world we live in, and also your mission of going out and finding, new disciples, right, in the area that you are, and in dealing with younger people, especially. Spiritual warfare is something that people have to deal with all the time, and it's something that we talk about a lot in this
Hmm.
program. I can only imagine that you've encountered some,
Yeah.
if you have, and and you don't mind sharing it. How have you encountered it? What
Yeah.
form has it taken? And how have you chosen to deal with it?
Yeah, great question. And I love that we're talking about it because it's kind of a taboo topic in the West. We're all about God, but as soon as you bring in the devil and demons, that seems a little out of whack, isn't it? Um, but if we believe in a good God, then that means there has to be a bad enemy, right? There has to be some force fighting against his good creation. And it absolutely is a thing. I've experienced it in a number of occasions. And really for me, like I've always been an anxious kid, with anxious tendencies. But if there's ever significant seasons in my life where it's almost always in seasons of transition. Um, so like when we were moving out from Sioux Falls, South Dakota to Indiana Wesleyan University, I had a major anxiety attack. When we were anxiety spiritual attack, I should say. It wasn't clinically an anxiety attack, an attack of anxiety on my soul. And then when we were getting ready to church plant, I had that exact same thing. Uh, when we were casting the vision for this new community center that our church is launching, every single Monday after I preached that vision casting series for 3 weeks, had very deep anxiety where I'm just like, there is no way this is going to happen. And so, basically, that is just something crippling that just my mind gets wound up in that, and therefore some depression symptoms can also come with that, and you know. Psychologists is just today will just say, well, that's a psychological thing. That's just a thing with your mind.
Right.
Um, well, the route from the physical world to your soul is through the mind, right? Paul tells us to take captive every thought that we have, because if the enemy can get you to believe a lie, then would you believe it? Your mind follows. So if I believe so sternly in the thought that our church plant is going to fail and I'm going to let my family down, that is a lie from the devil. Devil literally comes from the Greek word diablos, which means liar, deceiver, right? He is the father of lies. Jesus calls him the father of lies. That's his primary attack, is through us believing lies.
Yeah.
Then of course I'm going to feel anxious if I believe that, right? So that's often how it appears to me, is just this tightening of my mind. It's not just a mental thing; it is absolutely a spiritual thing. So, and how I've dealt with it, that's the other side of your question. Is crying into my wife's arms happens a lot. That's a good route. But other more proactive ways of dealing with those seasons of intense spiritual attack was through counseling. Like I had some really good counselors who taught me cognitive behavioral therapy for me to take my thoughts captive, and taking a very good psychological practice, but then pairing it with prayer of how to see reality through a different lens. Okay, well, let's take this thought of my church plant's going to fail and I'm going to let my family down. Okay, well, how does God view it? There's no such thing as a failed church plant. If you have to close it, go find a new job and you'll be okay. wow, I feel way better, and that's just simply from changing my thought from a God-sized perspective. But then in some of the other intense seasons of my life, I had to go through and participate in a prayer deliverance ministry, which is a very powerful way. Like it's basically 3 hours long of you sitting in a room with a team of people who are discerning. Uh, just whatever God wants to work on, anything that like, some wounding from your past that the enemy might have a stronghold on. Because, my anxiety in whatever season of that spiritual attack isn't always necessarily attached to the circumstance I'm facing. It's rooted in something deep from my past, right? Um, some trauma response from something as a kid that now, like, if something is out of my control, I just go haywire and the enemy has taken that. So it's this way of praying through your past and then viewing that circumstance through God's eyes that then now whenever you go back to it, you can kind of see it from a new lens. So multifaceted for sure. But those are some of the different ways of how I approach spiritual attack from minor occasions that happen, all the time to some of those major ones during major seasons.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing the way that you have too on this. That is the type of spiritual warfare that just goes unnoticed. Is what you were just
Yeah.
describing right there. Where every time I'm trying to do something, for my faith, for my church, I get this attack. I get this. It comes on me,
Mhm.
and you're right. People just go, "Oh, well, that's just your mind," and it's like, no, it's coming from somewhere. It's intentional. It's trying to knock me over. I think people think that if it isn't like, someone with red horns and a tail standing in front of me, then I'm not getting attacked spiritually. So
Yeah, for sure. Or if it's like a demon that you literally have to have exorcised out of you from like some crazy show, which those things do happen to travel in many other places in the world, and that's the kind of form of spiritual attack that you see. But a lot of the spiritual attack that happens in the West is through intellectual means.
yeah,
Um, the enemy already has us hooked in being skeptical of the spiritual realm anyway. So he's already got us there. It's now through more intellectual means or mental means that you see a lot of that attack particularly take place. You do still have kind of more of the physical tremors and like, things that happen with um, spiritual warfare in that way, but it's more so through those psycho emotional kind of yeah, instances. But
yeah.
that's interesting.
In terms of where you see it in other areas and with other people that have encountered it and things that you may have witnessed or heard of, do you think that that's kind of like the path more prevalent right now than other ones is like through education, through, academia, that type of thing?
Sure. Yeah. So, in spiritual attack, like we think of it strictly in terms of, I feel really heavy right now, or I feel really anxious or depressed or angry right now as an emotional response, or spiritual attack in something that's very circumstantial, like, and sometimes people can overly spiritualize something like, man, I got a flat tire on my way to this concert. The enemy is just really getting at me right now. It's like, no, you probably just had a flat tire, like there's or financial strain, some people might attach that to it, but there is also a very comfortable form of spiritual attack. It's almost more like anti-spiritual coaxing in a way, of trying to get people to believe that they don't need God, that they are comfortable on their own means. Again, the devil is a liar. And so one of the lies that he might put upon us is the thought of we don't even need this. And that's where you really can see that form of spiritual attack come out from these more intellectual academia perspectives, where they're teaching like, and it's just so crazy because like all the big league Ivy League schools like Stanford and Harvard and Duke and all these places, they started as Christian universities. All of them did, because the pursuit of knowledge and understanding was through that was a godly perspective. They were all divinity schools, and now it's so far from it. The pursuit of the
Yeah.
university in kind of that age was through yeah, through the lens of God being in the front of it, but not so anymore. So I think that that's another kind of spiritual attack people might see. Um, Even though it doesn't feel like an attack, it absolutely is if it's drawing you away from God's good creation
Yeah,
and
for sure.
intentions.
And like I said, I appreciate you sharing that, and I appreciate your opinion. I mean, I don't prepare you for any of these questions either. So, I mean, you're just handling them right off the cuff. I love that about you. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
the
I like it's kind of like a box of chocolates. You just don't know what you're gonna get, you know?
you just Forrest Gumped
A
my podcast.
theological box of chocolates.
Wow. All right, we're gonna take that one in stride. I appreciate it. I love
Thank you.
it. Okay. The another thing that's come up recently a lot has been, and you mentioned that you're part of the Wesleyan denomination, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yep.
And so, I mean, denominations are great. Everybody has more of a localized sort of home, to work from, to live within, to build community within. As we've looked at this, though, I mean, the number of Christians throughout the world outnumber anything else. I just by miles and
hmm
miles and miles. And yet, it seems like the most basic form of spiritual warfare in the world has hit us because not only are we
Mm.
splintered into denominations, but we also, a lot of them, are like warring with each other, like the clans
Yeah.
of old for some reason. England did that
hmm
to Scotland to keep them weak. They made sure that the clans kept warm with themselves and they never united against England. Is there any hope at this point for Christians to unite at some point and realize that our petty differences amongst ourselves are nothing compared to what, the devil and evil are trying to do to us? Because it really does look like we've been
Yeah.
divided to be conquered.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
Yeah.
Am I nuts?
Yeah. 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 No, you're not nuts. This is a fantastic question, which I have so many thoughts over. I have so many thoughts over. Um, so first of all, I mean, go back to Jesus, right? So one of the things he says of the Pharisees and their accusations of Jesus, like, you're of Beelzebub, you are of the devil. And Jesus says, like, why would I be doing stuff? Like, why would I be casting demons out of people? Like, why would I be fighting against Satan's house? A house divided, can't stand, like essentially, like, like that just he's basically refuting their argument. But that's also still true of churches though, of like if we're fighting against each other, then how are we possibly going to stand? If Satan's fighting against himself, how is his empire going to stand? Like, which you could argue that sin naturally is destructive, and therefore, that's a whole other uh, caveat. But um, yes, like, so there is absolutely this church division that's happening, but at the same time, like we're in some really interesting waters right now. So there are some theological traditions that almost seem irreconcilable. Like there's some who are, straight down the line, like, for the Arminian beliefs versus Calvinist beliefs, like predestination versus free will. Like you have some of those things, which is more like intellectual divisions of trying to interpret what God meant, how he works and his sovereignty and omniscience and all that through scripture. And then there's a variety of opinions on that. But then you also have some church divisions over just like the major tenets of belief, right? So you can consider this the split between progressive Christianity and and kind of more conservative Christianity. You have those different sides, and I should even be hesitant of using those terms because as soon as you attach any term in front of the word Christian, we're
Yeah,
starting to miss the point. A progressive Christian, a liberal Christian, a conservative Christian, an evangelical Christian, as if one is right and the other is wrong. No, the point is follower of Jesus, right?
right.
And so, even us in trying to find these camps, well, guess what? If we're truly trying to live the way of Jesus, I love this quote. If you're trying to follow the way of Jesus, you're going to look liberal to the conservatives, and you're going to look conservative to the liberals. You cannot try to put it in this box. And it is so true, isn't it? It's
Wow.
so true. Like we can't even put those things. So we have kind of that level of division. So we can't even use those terms because, if you're truly following Jesus, you split all of the lines. It's impossible to vote because inevitably you voting for one party is compromising on another part of the gospel that the other party can highlight. Now, the other party certainly has its issues too, but it just goes to show either way you vote, you're going to compromise somewhere on the gospel's mission. So there's another hot take for you. You can deal with that in your comment section, Rory. But so you have some of those different kinds of divisions here. But what else is really cool is, I'm in the church planting world, and What we're actually starting to see is a lot more collaboration from denominations to just get more churches planted. We're starting to see
Nice.
more like pastor networks of like, you're a Lutheran, you're a Methodist, you're a Catholic, and I'm a Wesleyan. Let's just gather together and celebrate wins of what God's doing in all of our unique expressions of the gospel in church, let's just come together and celebrate that. We're starting to see some more cross-pollinization of that. Yeah, churches just coming together to say, we have resources to start a new church. Let's find a planter and have them start their thing. We'll throw funding behind that. So there's a lot of cool collaboration like that amongst local churches, um, and which is really awesome. I have a number of other thoughts too, but one of the other things, whenever like one of our students brings up the question of denominations and division, you think it's like because we're that divided, but really, every denomination has a history of why it branched off of the other one. Sometimes it was to course correct from a denomination that was going wrong. For example, our Wesleyan denomination branched off from the Methodists because at that point, like this was in the 1800s, that original group of what would become the Wesleyan Church wanted to course correct the Methodists of not taking enough action towards slavery and the abolitionist movement and that sparked the Civil
Hmm.
War. So you can thank the Wesleyan Methodists for basically starting the whole Civil War and getting that whole thing going. They were talking about that in the 1820s, but often that's where those movements come from. But really, like the division between denominations has less to do with theology and viewpoints. A lot of it just comes down to church polity and politics and governance and just different ways of structuring church and some different definitions of things. And it's honestly a bunch of stuff that no one who attends your church cares about. It's more so from like the higher level of like the behind the scenes things of how they're structured and administered that a
Yeah.
lot of people just don't realize that 85% of what we believe, 90% of what all churches believe, like we agree on. It's that 10 to 15% that we get divided over and fight over. Um, so there you go. There's another hodgepodge of an array
I
of
I love the way
takes
you
from.
embraced that question. That was fantastic. It was really great
Thank
answer.
you.
As I've listened to a lot of these type of answers and stuff, I've heard that before, where it's the people who are up high, are the few are making the decision for the many, so to speak. But when you're making decisions like that, and you're coming off with my way is right and is the only right way, and your way is not right, you know, doesn't
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
somehow lend itself into the problem of pride?
Yeah. For sure.
I mean, just a
For
little bit.
sure. Um, Especially if you're not willing to listen to the many of whom you represent,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, for sure. And that's in part of like why I love our denomination. We have the best denomination. I'll just say it. The Wesleyan for Days is great.
There you
Um,
go.
I love our denomination. We are not perfect by any means, but and a lot of denominations are structured this way, but we have the general level of which is broken down to the districts, of which is broken down to local church boards who vote according to that. And so if we want to change anything at the general level, it has to go through the districts, which then comes down to local church delegates to this. So you have a good representation of the many in voting on these things to get stuff changed in the first place, which is something that I really appreciate about how that's structured. And not every denomination is structured that way. But that's certainly something that I respect is the constant feedback loop that we're able
Yeah.
to provide.
Excellent. The last thing that we try and cover here is discipleship, and I know that is a huge, huge part of your project. How do you go
Yeah.
about, building discipleship? What steps do you take to start it? And for folks who want to come out of the shadows and start doing that, start building discipleship, what kind of advice can we give them based on where you've had success?
Great question. I can talk discipleship all days. We might need another podcast episode for
We
that
may
in
have to do
itself.
another episode.
Uh, oh my goodness, part three. Let's do it. Discipleship, just to have a clarity of definition, because a lot of people think, especially from our programmatic version of church here in the 21st century in the West, we think discipleship is like, okay, like a one-on-one mentoring program. essentially. You have a discipler and you have a disciple. You have someone who is more advanced in their Christian faith, who's been walking in it for a little while. They find someone that they can disciple, almost as if it's like a one-on-one or a one-on-two kind of a thing. And that's certainly a part of it. But one of my favorite authors on this topic is John Mark Comer. Ever heard of him and his stuff?
I have not read his stuff, no.
Oh,
I'm going to have to
friends, you've
now.
got to jump. John Mark Comer, he's written a number of fantastic books, but he has an organization called Practicing the Way, which stands for Practicing the Way of Jesus. That has a number of beautiful resources for all the different spiritual practices we can have for living according to the way of Jesus, but also as disciples. And he wrote this book recently called Practicing the Way. It's essentially like the book version of everything that his nonprofit organization tries to do. But he defines disciples as simply one who follows a rabbi. Like that's what a disciple is. It is a student who follows their rabbi. And so for us, if Jesus is our rabbi, Jesus is our teacher. He was a teacher of God's word. So therefore he's a rabbi. Then a disciple is someone who, and this is his definition, um, becomes like Jesus, walks with Jesus, and does what Jesus did, essentially. I'm botching that. I'm missing one. But essentially, discipleship then isn't a program of one-on-one or even small groups. Discipleship is tapping into all of the things of the Christian life that is trying to follow Jesus to the T the best we can. If you were a disciple of your rabbi, you didn't just listen to his teachings. You followed him everywhere he went. You picked up his mannerisms. You picked up his teaching style. You ate what he ate. You literally walked in his footsteps until finally, by the end of your tenure there, he turned to you and say, "Okay, go and make disciples. You're officially a rabbi." We've heard that statement before, haven't we? That's the Great Commission of Jesus telling us to go and make disciples. He's
Uh,
essentially, when he tells us to do that, he is saying we are now mini rabbis, essentially, to do that.
hmm.
So to be a disciple is much more about living fully into the life that Christ has for you. And what's devastating is that you can be a Christian, but not be a disciple of Jesus. That is the biggest issue that we are seeing within the church here in the West. It's something where like there was some study that John Mark Comer cites where it's probably about like maybe 8% of professing Christians actually live a life that is attuned to being a disciple of Jesus, who's actively engaging in worship, who is actively taking Sabbath, who is actively praying every day, who's in scripture, who's serving their communities, who are plugged into faithful community with other spiritual friends. Like, because we know all the people in our churches who they're Christians, are showing up for worship, but it's disconnected from the intentions of what Jesus really had for you to fully embody everything. And so how I would define discipleship is tapping into all the practices that Jesus himself did so that you can mimic his life as best as you possibly can. And that might include one-on-one discipleship, but it includes a whole array of other practices that a lot more people don't do than who profess to be Christ followers. So, yeah, what do you want to go from there?
I mean, wow, that those numbers are kind of staggering, to be honest with you.
It's staggering.
So,
Staggering because we have in our approach of church here in the West, you go anywhere else like in the world, and this isn't a problem for them. To be a Christ follower implies living a life of a disciple, but we have basically in our churches softened the requirement of Christians to say all you need to do is just come to church every week. Just come to church every week. Like, like we are taking discipleship of deep commitment to the way of Jesus and his life out of the equation because it costs too much. It's too hard. It's almost too religious to say people have to do all of these things, all these practices. But church leaders have now softened the requirement of what it means to be an active disciple of Jesus. Now we just have a bunch of church attenders who say they're Christians, but might not necessarily be disciples. So
wow,
yeah, that's where you see the disconnect. Mhm.
wow. Now you're working hard on this in building your church, the one that you've planted and that you've been building up. So how do you delineate the difference, so to speak, in terms of the folks that you are discipling, are bringing into the church?
For sure. Yeah. So we are constantly talking about on-ramps of how our people need to get involved to be formed into vibrant lives that withstand hardship. That's our mission statement. We form vibrant lives that withstand hardship to be a resilient disciple. That's what you got to do. And essentially, we tell people to, one, download the Church Center app so that way you can just always be connected to our church through a digital means. But then if you can join a serving team with our church and hop into a small group, if you are involved in those three things, Sunday morning church, serving team, small group, you are exponentially more likely to take all the other facets of the Christian life more seriously. Because one, you have a larger commitment to your local body, right? So if you're committed to the group, that means you're going to be more committed to the things the group promotes and supports. So if you're serving on a team, that means you're more engaged with your church, which means you're going to show up more, which means you're going to learn from the sermons, you're going to take notes during it, you're going to try to apply it, and therefore you're probably likely going to read his word a little bit more. You're going to hop into a small group to discuss it. You're going to pray at that group, and therefore like it, and then you're going to pray more in your own life, and then it becomes a more robust form of discipleship. Like it's not this one program or you have a discipleship program to say, it's trying to get your people involved at a deeper level to where now that commitment to the way of Jesus can go full throttle holistically, living missionally in your workplace, going on missions trips, right? Um, and sometimes it starts in the smallest of ways. Like I think of one of our attenders. He's such a goofball. I love him to death. His name's Kyle, and he's involved with our tech stuff, right? Like he loves running sound for us, and he's really great at um, running Pro Presenter. So he presses the right arrow key all the time to move slides through for us to sing. And you might think like, where's the discipleship in that? Like he's just moving slides down, for people to sing the songs to. Well, it's through his constant exposure of being present in a church more. The average church attender attends church only once every 6 weeks, to put that in perspective.
Wow.
So the fact that he's here more consistently, rubbing shoulders with these people, like more faith is caught, not taught. We can teach all the principles, right? But when you are embodied and surrounded by people who are living this out, it starts to affect you. Um, and I believe that Kyle went on last year's missions trip because he had been exposed to the Christian faith through regularly serving. Like there's so many facets of how you get it. And so how we really try to cultivate that with our people is if we can get them to take just these two simple steps of serve on a team and join a group, you are that much more likely to live a vibrant life in Jesus. And I see it. I look at our people who are involved in those two things and who aren't, and I can see a very clear difference in how adamantly they live out their faith. Or at the very least, even if it's not our group, as long as they're involved in whether that's a campus ministry or they have something where they're cultivating that faith in a smaller group of others, it's likely to be a lot more robust in their own life.
Nice. Nice. Love what you're doing. Always have. So, wonderful. I tell you what, one of the things that we are calling people to do in Wake Up the Lions is to go out and start the process of building discipleship. And you don't have to arrive at it overnight. It's not like, oh, here you go, check these boxes, pay this fee, and now you're a disciple. It's go out,
Yeah.
lead by example, profess your faith, be proud of, who you are and what you believe and stop apologizing
Mhm.
for being a
Yeah.
Christian. Um, to that end, as we kind of wrap things up here, and you've been amazing, brother, you really have. As we wrap things
Yeah.
up here, what's maybe a word of advice or a parting thought for the folks who are trying to get into that, who are waking up and they're going, I need to do something. I want to lead by example. I want to, start this process. Anything you can tell them that may help is absolutely welcome. Take us home.
Mm. Oh man, what a buffet of answers that I could give. Uh, Closing my eyes so that way I can think clearly, for those who are listening to this. If I could give any word of advice for someone to take the next step into this, several things come to mind. We'll just see what comes out. First, don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. Don't be afraid to dig into the hard questions. It's not going to be easy. The more serious you get with this, depending on like, did you grow up into the church and you know all the right answers, or is this something new to you? Um, Ask the hard questions, dig in. Nothing's off limits. God's not intimidated by your questions. And find somebody that you trust that you can wrestle with, these questions with. I think is really, really important. So that's the first thing. Second, this is another thing that I really encourage our people with, and it's you got to find your group of spiritual friends to do this with. I wrote a book on this, so I'm pretty passionate about it, but where I see a lot of our students falter, it's they come to college and they feel like there's only two options. They can either follow Jesus alone or abandon their faith and have friends.
Mm.
And a lot of times friendships win out because we're designed for community. Our brains thrive when we're in aggregates, when we're together.
Yeah.
But there is a third option. Find friends who follow Jesus. Doesn't matter how much you're reading scripture and how much you're praying and all those other things. If you're doing it in a silo, you're not going to grow near as much unless you can have that body of spiritual friends who can know you completely, where nothing's off limits, who's going to spur you further, that you can laugh together and do all the fun stuff that's great about friendships, but that's also going to show you the heart of God. Spiritual friendship is a laboratory for us extending the love of Christ to each other, essentially. And so we need those deep committed friendships who are on board with that. So yeah, I think those are kind of my main big pieces that I can that's my anthill that I would die on. Anthill, mountain. I totally mix two figures of speech in that. I do that all the
You
time.
know what? You can
Either
do
way,
every
those are my two big things.
brother. You've brought so much today. You can end any way you want. I mean, you can slice and dice three or four more analogies together if you want. I'm game. It all works.
One of my favorites I say is I'm through the moon. Uh, Instead of over the moon and
Over.
through the roof, I say I'm through the moon. Through the moon.
All right. I mean, hey, again, whatever works for you, man. It's
Thank
it's
you, Roy.
all right, man. I love it. Pastor of Resilient Church and author of You Need Friends, Pastor Jake Thurston, expert church planter and authority on building discipleship,
Oh,
especially on our show. Oh my goodness. Got to have you back on again in the future, brother. Absolutely have to have you back on so we can dive into some more
dude.
topics. I love your passion for what you do. I love your energy. I love your attitude. Thank you for being here today. Meant a lot to me, and I really appreciate you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the opportunity again, Roy. I hope it's a blessing to you and your listeners.
Already is. Already is, brother. All right, folks. It is time. It's time to wake up the lions. More than that, it's time for you to take your rightful place with your brothers and sisters and let them hear you roar. The world is ready. You're ready. You just have to believe it.